I'd like to bring town council regular meeting for December 20th to order. Roll call, please.
Councilor Schoen.
Present.
Councilor Mellon.
Present.
Councilor Gardner.
Present.
Councilor Tulowitzki.
Present.
President Kulturitis.
Present.
Excellent.
Thank you. Please stand for a moment of silence and the pledge of allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. That brings us to the open to the public. In-person public comments is limited to 2 minutes maximum per person or 5 minutes for a group spokesman. Please keep your comments civil and constructive to public policy issues. The chair, at its sole discretion, may recognize any individuals wishing to speak on any topics at any time and may end the open to the public session. All speakers will be timed by the clerk treasurer. This portion of the meeting shall not exceed 20 minutes. Public comments can also be submitted electronically. If you have any questions or comments about an item on the agenda, please email that question and comment to danderson@munster.org. Mr. Anderson will ensure that all submissions are shared with the elected officials of the town. That submissions will only be entered into the minutes of the meeting. Please keep your comments civil and constructive to public policy. If anyone wishes to speak, please step up to the podium, state your name and address, and it's all yours. Anybody wish to speak tonight? Anybody online? I will close the open to the public. That brings us on to the consent agenda.
Mr. President, I move we accept the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Councilor Schoen.
Yes.
Councilor Mellon.
Yes.
Councilor Gardner.
Yes.
Councilor Tulowitzki.
Yes.
And President Kulturitis.
Yes.
5-0 accepted the consent agenda.
Thank you. There's nothing under old business. Under new business, item A, engagement letter, fixed assets, Peterson Consulting Services.
This would be from the clerk treasurer's office. In the past, we've used Peterson Consulting to prepare our fixed assets. We would like to use them for 1 more year. With the split year, with old and new softwares, we feel we need their assistance. Once we're in the new software, you know, a full year, we feel like we can do it ourselves, but we need 1 more year, please.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I'll make a motion that we confirm the letter of engagement with Peterson Consulting Services at an amount not to exceed $3,900.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Councilor Schoen.
Yes.
Councilor Mellon.
Yes.
Councilor Gardner.
Yes.
Councilor Tulowitzki.
Yes.
And President Kulturitis.
Yes.
5-0.
Item B, ordinance 1853, prohibition on the retail sale of dogs and cats by pet shops.
Thank you, sir. I believe we have 2 special guest stars willing to discuss this issue from the Humane Indiana.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President and honorable members of the Munster Town Council. My name is Samantha Morton, and I'm the Indiana State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. And I just want to thank you so much for considering this Humane Pet Store Ordinance this evening. I also want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you a little bit about why I urge you to consider this Humane Pet Store Ordinance. There's 4 issues that I'd like to bring up this evening to talk to you about that might be concerning to the Munster community if a puppy selling pet store may enter the Munster community. So the first issue is an animal welfare problem. A significant number of puppies and kittens that are sold at pet stores come from large-scale commercial breeders, otherwise known as puppy mills, where these puppies are churned out for profit over the health and welfare of the mother dog and the pups. It's hard to imagine a worse situation for an 8-week-old puppy that's caught in this system. Most of these pet store puppies are born to cruel and unsanitary puppy mills. They're taken from their mothers at just weeks old and they're trucked long distances across the country and then placed on a pet store sales floor. What most customers that are shopping at these stores don't see are these mother dogs languishing in these faraway puppy mills where they're provided bare minimum standards that barely keep them alive. The second issue I want to mention tonight is consumer protection problems. Because of the conditions that these puppies are born into and the inbreeding of the mothers and the stress of the transport on these dogs, these puppies are often sick. And oftentimes these consumers, when they're purchasing these dogs, will purchase a sick puppy that worst case scenario could end up passing away after a customer has spent hundreds or thousands of dollars on vet bills for that puppy. There's also some public health concerns related to this issue because according to the American Medical Association and the CDC, pet store puppies, they're continuing to expose staff and customers to a very antibiotic resistant strain of Campylobacter. In some situations, there was actually an outbreak tied to an Indiana broker called Blue Ribbon Puppies, where people were actually infected and across the country. So there was a recent study that showed that this was an issue, and there were a lot of people who became ill based on working in the pet store or actually purchasing a sick puppy from the store. And then the fourth problem I want to highlight is predatory lending that comes up. So puppy financing options are a key part of these sales, the sales pitch that goes on in the store. So many people cannot afford a puppy that costs thousands of dollars. And so these pet stores will push financing that can often end up with interest rates of up to 188%. Sometimes we've heard stories where people are still making they're making payments on purchases for these puppies even after the puppy has passed away in some circumstances. So I realize that the town of Munster does not have any puppy selling pet stores, and I know that's not an issue in your community, but I wanted to mention that this ordinance would not affect consumer choice. Munster residents can still purchase puppies from reputable breeders who want to meet the consumer. They have an option for the consumer to see where the puppies are growing up, the mother dogs, and so that's an option. And then there's also a lot of really wonderful shelters and animal rescue organizations within your community where people can find a puppy or a kitten, another pet of their choice. And another reason I wanted to just urge you to consider this ordinance this evening, there's been over 400 communities across the country and 5 states, including Illinois, that have passed humane pet store legislation. The 6 communities in Indiana include St. Joseph County, Columbus, Dyer, Highland, Crown Point, and Bloomington, Indiana. And you may have heard with the Illinois law passing recently, the effective date of that law is February 2022. And we have seen 3 puppy selling pet stores that have come over the border from Illinois into Lake and Porter counties, including in Schererville, in Portage, and Hammond. And so we know that as that February 22 effective date becomes closer, we anticipate more stores coming into specifically Northwest Indiana. So I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
Do we have any questions at all?
Ms. Morton, just, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming and giving this presentation and the legwork that you've done here. It's commendable. So we got some cats. And I'm aware that shelters will often use pet stores as a place to have their sales events or adoption days. How would that be impacted by these ordinances? No, we don't have such a pet store in Munster, so I'm not so concerned about that, but it's a point of curiosity. How is that still allowed in PetSmart and Schererville, for example?
Yes, that's an excellent question, and it's totally allowed and encouraged. In fact, the biggest and most successful pet stores, including PetSmart and Petco, often adoption events for both dogs and cats, and they've said it's one of the things that really drives their business. It drives people into the store to see the adoptable animals, and they know that they're part of an $180 billion pet industry that's really thriving on pet supplies, grooming, leashes. People love their pets and they spend money on them. So. Great question.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, our neighbors care for hundreds of cats at a shelter, and that was at that event. So that was my only question about that. Thank you for clarifying. I'm in favor of this legislation.
Thank you again for coming tonight.
Thank you so much.
Bring it back to the council.
Mr. President, I would move that we adopt ordinance 1853.
There's a second.
Hold on one
Oh.
second.
On first
so-
reading, or how are we doing this?
So you have the option with unanimous consent, right, to adopt it on first reading. Or you could, hear it on first reading and set a second reading in January, which is what I would encourage you to do. Because I do have some legal questions about the verbiage, as well as, while I understand the intent, and I think the intent is laudable, for the same way there are other legal businesses. Let's take, for instance, the selling of vape products, right? Could I pass an ordinance that says there's no retail sales of vape products in the town of Munster? The answer to that is clearly no, right? So, and you guys have asked me that question before, right? So here I have what appears to be, and I'm not talking about the ones that they're talking about. I'm talking about like the legal ones that there are no violations. Like, how do I say no to that? And I guess that's a question legally. I would, if I were you, I would encourage you to want the answer to that before you pass the ordinance. So while I think you can hear it on first reading and set it, and I would ask you to set it for the second meeting in January to give me a little bit of time to kind of dig into that. I also want to know, like, and I don't expect any of these answers tonight, but like also nursery, right? They sell pets. It's a retail place. Like, I think under the definition, it probably would be outlawed. So, and not only that,
Oh, I'm sorry, do you mean like also, that's not here, but?
yeah, the
also
one on
nursery
41 in
sells-
St. John.
When they do sell pets.
Yeah, PetSmart, and I don't know if they still do
Mike
it
says no
They don't sell, Alsip doesn't sell dogs and cats anymore.
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 Well, I know they
But they
used
used to, because
They
my
used
wife
to.
bought one from there.
The only thing
So-
you're gonna get there is a ferret, or a turtle. a bird.
but they
So-
could change back.
Yeah,
So these are things, like PetSmart at one point used to have puppies that you could go purchase. So I'm not saying no, I'm not saying don't pass the ordinance. I'm saying
Give you some time.
just give me a minute to kind of catch our breath on this.
All right.
And she is right. I am familiar with bad actors trying to move into, and I won't get specific, but into neighboring communities, maybe one in the north. That where we have had the issue where there's a track record of being a puppy mill, and I've seen it, and I've worked with their planning department with regard to how to curtail the potential there. So I totally understand the issue. I totally get where she's coming from, and the intent behind the ordinance is laudable. I just want to make sure it's legal. That's all.
All right.
So I would be happy, sorry. do you have-
no, well, maybe if you want to make the motion and
Sure,
we
I
have
will- so I-
discussion.
I will amend that motion to hear ordinance 1853 on first reading and set for adoption on the second meeting in January.
There's a second.
I'll
The second meeting in January?
Yes, the second town council.
I'll second the
All
motion.
right, any discussion?
Oh, I have a question. So do you have a list, or does such list exist of places that, like retail places that do sell dogs and cats that do follow or don't go to puppy mills, or is there such a thing? Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yes, that's an excellent question. And so we know that responsible breeders just don't sell their dogs or cats to pet stores. They want to meet the person who's purchasing that animal. They want to make sure that that's a right fit. And so there are also breed codes of conduct that these breeders will sign on to, that they say that they will never sell their dogs or cats to pet stores. So we just know. And that doesn't include, you know, adoptable animals that are being showcased like at a Petco or a PetSmart or anything like that. But we know largely the puppies in pet stores are coming from puppy mills, oftentimes in states far away from Indiana, although Indiana is home to many puppy mills.
That brings me to another question we have, and I won't, and I can't even remember the name, but we did have we should call it a boutique pet store that approached a development and wanted, we had the feeling that, or impression that it would be one of those kind of cute, the puppies in cradles and make it look all fancy, like they're not coming from puppy mills. My guess is that they probably were. But because of where it was located, it wasn't allowed based on an agreement we had done for that particular development. So we denied it. But do you find, and this is just curiosity as well, do you find that they do that, you know, that it looks a lot better than where it's coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes what a pet store will tell you is that they come from USDA Class A breeders, which is true. However, that's a requirement. It's kind of like if you drive a car, you have to have a driver's license. It doesn't mean that you're a good driver. And so it's just something that's required by the U.S. Department of Agriculture if you're breeding 5 or more female dogs. And so I think that they use a really catchy sales pitch. The dogs are really cute. People go in there and oftentimes it's an impulse purchase. They walk away with a dog they can't afford that often ends up becoming ill, and then they're riddled with, you know, vet bills and things of that nature. And I mean, not every single time, I mean, certainly, but you know, it's something that happens, and there are concerns with these stores and the dogs and cats that are being sold, and the mother and father dogs that are being kept in these puppy mills, you know, in faraway places. And one other thing I was just going to say too, like you don't have here in Munster, I mean, you have control over what you do here within your town, but you don't have control over puppy mills in Iowa or Missouri. But you can take action on this here in your community and make a humane decision. And so that's why we encourage you to adopt this ordinance.
Questions?
That's all that I have for you. I was just going to ask about if we set this for a second, thank you. Yeah, if we set this for a second reading in the interim, if one would apply to come in because they do know that they're going to be, you know, forced to leave Illinois, and with us being, obviously this is a big concern because we're a border community, so often things that can't survive in Illinois come here. So do we have any, can it be like, well, it's on the books, it's going to be, chances are, I mean, I don't know what everybody else's feelings are, but.
No, and even if you adopted it tonight, it couldn't go into effect for 30 days, right?
True.
Because there's a fine.
But then we have 30 more, which puts us into
It's all true.
February.
You have that risk. In my other experience, it's been other laws that, because it's not the situation where it's like this fancy boutique type looking thing, it pretty much see it coming, right? Like, so everyone, like the sirens went off as soon as there was the application. So we've been successful in stopping it, but no, you're right. Every day that goes by, if they would apply before you would get something on the books,
And their grandfather did.
that's correct.
Any store that would be a retail center for pets would likely require an internal build out, which would have to come before our site plan review committee, on which plan commission members sit and can ask pertinent questions. And generally those petitioners want to make a positive impression. So there could be a scenario where you have someone that wants to come in and follow the law that would allow them to come here. And many questions could be asked that are pertinent to the community standards and existing building code. oftentimes, even complying businesses come in kind of on a hope and a dream, and they have a little bit more homework to do. So it's not uncommon for a business to come from concept to execution over the course of more than 30 days. So there is an element of time, there is an exposure while we noodle on this. But I don't know if someone coming in under the cover of darkness and having a puppy selling operation is likely. Possible.
Right, it's always possible.
Yeah.
Well, and I would rather have something that is as soundproof as possible when it comes to the legal, protecting us legally, because if you get sued, that's all, it doesn't,
Right.
washes it all away anyway, so. Okay, sorry.
You're fine.
You ready?
Yes.
Counselor Schoen,
Yes.
Counselor Mellon,
Yes,
Counselor Gardner,
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
and President Kulturitis.
Yes.
5-0. We'll hear this with the second read. I think the date is January 17th.
Yes.
Item C, Gallagher Bassett proposal.
So at your last meeting, we brought to you our property and casualty coverage. And we mentioned that we were going back and forth with our third-party claims administration to agree on a scope and terms. And I am happy to bring this proposal to you. We have secured stable terms with our third-party claims management firm for the next 5 years. And my recommendation to you is to authorize me to bind coverage for our third-party claims management program with Gallagher Bassett. So as these rates, as you see, there's a 2% increase this year if you choose to allow me to bind that coverage 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, and 3 in year 5. In my previous memo regarding workers' compensation and property generally, workers' compensation is a very volatile place for insurance right now. And unfortunately, we're not in a vacuum. We take place in a national market, and that volatility has also impacted third-party claims. So to lock in these rates for the term, our broker believes, and I agree, that this is highly advantageous for the town. Were we to go out to market, we would probably see something in the range of 3.5. And every year there's more unknown. And when there's this much volatility, these are reasonable increases. I'm comfortable with this. And because we are self-insured, these are rates that are incurred as incidents happen. So even though these rates increase modestly year over year, if we control our losses, if we are proactive with safety measures, it doesn't necessarily mean an increase in expenditure. So all these rates could increase, but if we have one less car accident, we don't pay as much as we did this year, right? So my recommendation is to allow me to bind this coverage at your pleasure.
Thank you, Justin.
Mr. President, I move to authorize town manager to bind coverage for our third-party claims management program with Gallagher Bassett as attached.
Is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion? Roll call.
Counselor Schoen,
Yes.
Counselor Mellon,
Yes,
Counselor Gardner,
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
and President Kulturitis.
Yes.
5-0.
Item D, Public Works, purchase of a 2021 hot patcher. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it is it's a hot patch of a job.
sounds better.
Yeah.
Sounds-
So this is a great piece of equipment. It's in our 5-year capital plan. And we're asking for your permission to purchase this piece of equipment. It's a hot patch. It will allow us to apply a more durable fix to some of our more spicy potholes.
All right, thank you.
Mr. President, I move to approve purchase from Seal Master of a new 4-ton asphalt hot box recycler with trade-in of $1,500 for a net price through Sourcewell of $33,688 to replace unit number 358.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Any discussion on this?
No one likes spicy potholes.
Not at all. Roll call.
Counselor Schoen.
Yes.
Counselor Mellon.
Yes.
Counselor Gardner.
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki.
Yes.
And President Kulturitis.
Yes. Item E, Munster utility easement.
So this is an easement that we would like to execute in effect to allow NICD to move a stormwater pipe for their project behind 480 West 45th, which is where Three Floyd's production facility is. So NICD will move that large stormwater structure, but we have to have permission. We have to have an easement from the street, which is the commercial real estate entity that is willing to grant us that easement before they can do that. So here we are asking your permission to do so.
Mr. President, I would make a motion that we authorize the town manager to execute the utility easement between the SREIT, which I believe is the company, and the town of Munster.
Is there a second?
I'll second
Any discussion?
My only question would be is, again, we talk about a bridge over 45th. That's a train bridge going over 45th. So the train's gonna go over 45th.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good.
And my only question would be, is there any impact on Three Floyd's manufacturing capability?
No, this is outside the envelope of the building.
Don't worry, Steve. Don't worry.
All right. Roll call, please.
Counselor Schoen.
Yes.
Counselor Mellon.
Yes.
Counselor Gardner.
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki.
Yes.
And President Kulturitis.
Yes.
5-0.
Item F, impact Munster risk assessment scope of work.
So the feedback that we received was that there was too much ambiguity to feel good about this last time with regard to the scope as it pertains to the police department and the state and federal databases that they interact with on a daily basis that are highly sensitive. So Impact worked with Lieutenant Johnston and refined the scope and took out the specific IP address that interfaces with those state and federal databases. So the door to where all the danger has been double locked. And now the risk assessment is for the rest of town. It will not touch the sensitive data that is shared between the town, state, and federal government. There was a question about why is this not included in the standard scope of services that Impact has with the town. The answer that I received was the scope of services that we have with Impact is for the operations and maintenance of our network and our devices. So they keep things running, they keep up best practices, they do virus patches, they make network connection things happen, right? The box don't work, now the box works, right? This is a different kind of work. This is more of a kind of a white hat problem solving analysis, kind of hide and seek that one side of the house plays with the other to make sure everyone's doing the absolute best job they can. So it is a different sort of work. And for different sorts of work, you have to have different sorts of agreements. Very similar to when Jill provides on-call engineering services. Hey, Jill, will you look at this? Yeah. Versus, hey, Jill, will you design Main Street for me? Well, we have new contracts. So all the CCMG projects have new scopes, have individual scopes of work because they're more significant than the day-to-day expertise that we ask that contractor to have and are significant enough to warrant a defined scope of work. So if they step outside that scope of work, there's price controls and defined expectations and deliverables.
So Dustin, so are you looking for a motion for the total cost of this pricing, or is it just
I am. If it so,
$16,712.
if it so pleases the council.
Just want to make sure, because I didn't see that on here.
That's my error. Please forgive me.
That's okay. All good.
Mr. President, I would move to authorize the town manager to enter into an agreement with Impact for services outlined in the proposal for an amount not to exceed $16,712.
Is there a second? Any discussion?
Has there been any discussion about, is it better to have a different company doing this work than the company that is supplying the work?
No, but I'm happy to go out and issue an RFP for this work. I do believe that there's value in the work. I have no vested interest in this particular outcome. If you'd like to see us bring back an RFP with some potential solutions, happy to do that.
Are there other companies that do this work?
I would have to think that in the environment that modern business takes place in, there has to be someone else that does it. I'm sure if there was a representative from Impact that had a vested interest, they'd say something along the lines of, we want to make sure that we're doing the absolute best job for you. And this side of the company likes to dunk on that side of the company, and nothing would make them happier than posterizing their colleagues. But I don't really buy into that. I thought the proposal was compelling. I do think there's value in the work, but I don't really care who does it.
I guess a little bit of my concern would be just the opposite, that one side of the company is going to make sure that the other side of the company doesn't look bad. And again, I know nothing about this type of infrastructure or review or any of that stuff, but that would be my concern having, and again, did you think it when was this always a cost that you knew was going to happen? Or did they just come to you recently and say, hey, that's not part of our contract?
I would say sometime in the early third quarter of 2021, we were having a regular business update on the enterprise. And it was brought to my attention that we have not done a security risk assessment since Impact began their service with us in 2017. Ideally, I've learned that this is something you probably want to do at least every 3 years. So we're kind of out of tolerance for industry best practice, given the size of our enterprise. They brought in a gentleman named Aaron Finnemore. We talked about the scope. I thought it was good. We had some feedback from council and the police department. We revised the scope. Here we are. Again, it's totally fine. If you're uncomfortable with it, this is not a have to right now.
I personally think Impact has been doing a decent job for us. And I think just getting someone in here to look at the books makes sense. And then, we can reassess this at the next time around. So that would just be my 2 cents on this. Not that I don't invite anything.
I believe cyber security risks are a clear and present danger. You hear it happening to municipalities and government organizations. Ransomware, the price tag seems reasonable. It's a sort of insurance or preventive step that we can take. I'm curious, Chuck, if you or Lieutenant Johnston or someone has a strong information that we can consider of why it's not a good practice to have Impact also do the cybersecurity assessment?
Again, my only thought would be Impact. We have a pretty large contract with Impact already, right? Isn't it?
It's not insignificant.
It's a large contract, and again, just for what the purpose, what Dustin is saying, I don't think one side of a company that has a large contract is going to, try to make the other side of the contract look, they're going to try to make it look good. And again, I don't know anything about cybersecurity. I'm just asking the question, is it better to have another company do a check on security? I don't know what we do with audits financially and different things, or, when we have inspections and different things. I'm just asking the question.
I think it is an important distinction that like the audit side of Impact is fiscally separate than the operations and maintenance side. It's kind of like NIPSCO and NiSource. Yeah, they're the same, but they're not quite the same. So it's not like one of our on-site engineers that we know by face and we have relationships is going to come in here and do this work. It's going to be people unfamiliar to us and unfamiliar to the entity as a client, for what it's worth. Now, that may not allay the concerns you have, but that is my understanding of the staffing of this particular product.
I just wanted to ask the question, so I'm fine. Yes.
Just so you know, these types of tests are good to have. And we are, for all intents and purposes, walled off to protect us. That being said, though, we're using CISA internally for our penetration test, which is Critical Infrastructure Security Agency through the federal government. They do it for free for the police department and municipalities. But we plan on using them. That way we can bypass any concerns the state or federal government have with using the databases we have access to. I know Purdue was doing it with their students. Through NISA, I know they were offering pen tests to organizations for free. How good they are, I don't know.
When you say pen test, that's a penetration test. Is that how it?
Penetration test, which
Okay.
we're discussing here.
Okay.
But I just kind of wanted to outline direction we're going with this. And we need to, just because it's easier to work with CISA than it is an outside group and get all these approvals for who's going to be doing that scope of work and getting them all certified through the state. So that's kind of the direction we're going.
So in this situation, what we've done is Impact is going to take care of everything in the town except for the police department.
For this particular risk assessment,
This one risk assessment.
they do take care of the police on an operations and maintenance basis.
Also, when I read section 2 of the customer responsibilities, there are 6 items that are outlined there, fully backed up copies of data, et cetera. And I think one of the benefits maybe of going with Impact is they are the customer in this sense. So they will make sure that our infrastructure is all prepared to do this audit properly. And I don't think CISA provides for water bills and public works and our emails and town emails and all those things. I don't think they provide that service for free. So this sounds like an add-on layer of inspection and preventive maintenance. I think also a benefit could be, if they were here, and I don't know Impact either, that operationalizing any findings from the audit would be much more direct and not with this sort of, is there another auditor who's, now they shouldn't do this, I work at an audit firm, so they shouldn't be mixing this, but is there another auditor who maybe wants to have Town of Munster IT business? So could have an incentive to find things and not, it is difficult when you get competitive firms working within one company that can introduce some undesirable like conflict that we don't need in our IT. Just a few other things to consider.
I would just have a question. Mr. Wessel, do you have like any thoughts on it or experience with other municipalities or that you could share? When it came, because we've looked at, seems like both of those things could happen. So you know what I mean, like what you're saying and what I'm saying. So just.
The other municipalities do their IT in-house. So when they go and get somebody to do this kind of risk assessment, it's always somebody outside that's looking at what's being done, like internally. I didn't think of it the way Steve was talking about it, but I kind of see Chuck's point. So I think really what the issue comes down to, because I agree with Chief Shekel that you need to have this done, right? Like it's got to be done. And I don't really think this is something you can wait like a year to do. I think, you know, like this is like a first quarter 2022 project. Like it's not going to get better with cybersecurity. So I think the issue is, you know, like if you put it out for competitive proposals, like, is that going to push it off too long? Right? Like that, I think that's what it comes down to. And
The other thing it could come down to, I imagine 16,700 feels like a pretty good price for this sort of audit based on the work that my employer does. Could come down to, we do an RFP, we go through spending all that time and we get other bids that come in above this, and then we have a lowest responsible bidder.
well, if it's a proposal though, you're really talking about a professional service. So you can take into account everything, which would include taking into account price. So
It's not buying a hot asphalt.
that's right, you're not doing that. So because you're buying a service, you would be able to consider those other factors. And I guess I would say, yeah, listen, if they come in at 16 grand or whatever this number is, and every other bid is like 60,000, like that kind of makes me scratch my head and go, all right, I get a hometown discount, but right, and if they're all 20, then you go, well, all right, it's a hometown discount. I don't know how fast you need this done. I think it's the first quarter of next year thing you want wrapped up, right? You know, the longer it goes, the longer it goes, so.
We've been over 4 years now without it. I'm
That's
sure.
what's
we-
concerned.
Again, my concern, my question was mainly just, should we look at somebody else? And you know, town managers answered the question and we could take it to a vote. I do think it's one of those things where we need, I wouldn't be concerned about going out for an RFP to, you know, get a couple of proposals by February 1st or whatever else, but I believe that staff has looked at this long enough, and again, there was concern, and they're bringing this to our attention for the second time in 3 months, and hey, I'm ready to move forward with it, so. But again, it is concerning that we have, again, a department that's not gonna be part of this, but I guess there's an understanding of why that's happening, and we're good that way.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me, what Chief's doing and Damon, I totally get that. And maybe the compromise is what Andy said, which was, let's approve this now, and let's not wait 4 years. The next time, let's, you know, in 2 years, let's go out for RFP and get it done in a 2-year increment, where at least you have this done now, right, and you're not hanging out there. Or you say, I want to see the RFPs now. I think that's really the question.
I understand Chuck's point, and I think it's a very good idea to get other companies anytime in an audit. But Impact has been around for a while. They know our program, which means they can jump in and start moving faster. But they also have a reputation to uphold. If they were to do something underhanded, saying something is good when it really wasn't, and that gets out, they lose their reputation. And that's a strong incentive to do it right.
Okay, roll call.
You don't agree?
No, I'm agree. I was asking a question. That's all I was asking.
More conversation than you've already.
Yes.
Yes.
I want those 10 minutes back.
I do too.
Counselor Schoen,
Yes.
Counselor Mellon.
Yes.
Counselor Gardner.
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki.
Yes.
And President Kulturitis.
Yes.
5-0.
Item G, 2022 meeting schedule.
Can I, do you mind? Mr. Anderson,
mind?
Mr.
I don't mind.
Council President, this is just the outline schedule for 2022. If you'll note, there are 2 dates that will not meet, and that is July 4th and September 5th, 4th of July and Labor Day respectively. We did not exclude the day before the election. Sometimes that's a problematic, but if we know they're going to set up, it's a smaller election, if you will. It's
In terms.
yes, thank you. That's the real term.
Yeah.
So I think this year it would be okay. If it was a presidential election, we may want to reconsider, but.
You can always change it then too. So.
Exactly.
Okay.
If
Is that just more or less just more informational, or do we have to vote on, do we have to agree with? Do we have
We have to vote on
It's
it.
on the reports or just?
No, I think it,
Oh, it's in, you want to get it in the record and then she can publish it.
Okay.
Mr. President, I move that we adopt the 2022 meeting schedule as presented.
For a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right, any discussion on it?
Leanne, Ms. Mellon? Okay, thank you. All right, Counselor Schoen,
Yes.
Counselor Mellon?
Yes.
Counselor Gardner?
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki?
Yes.
And President Kulturitis?
Yes.
All right.
Item H, reorganization of the town council appointments to board and commissions.
There's a memo attached, and in the memo, it talks about the various boards and commission, the town council, the redevelopment commission, and the redevelopment commission, the RDA Transit Development District Steering Committee. Those are most pressing, perhaps, to get reorganized. So under recommended action, it's recommended we reorganize the town council effective January 1st of 2022. We reorganize the redevelopment commission, and then we make an appointment to the RDA Transit Development District Steering Committee. And then just as a note, any additional board and commission appointments as well as the council portfolio will be made on the January 17th, 2020 council meeting,
All right.
2022.
So, okay,
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to nominate Counselor Gardner to serve as the president effective January 1, 2022 for the year.
I'll second that.
any other nominations? Roll call.
Counselor Schoen,
Yes.
Counselor Mellon,
Yes.
Counselor Gardner,
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
and President Kulturitis.
Yes. That brings us to the vice president's position.
Mr. President, I would make a motion that we appoint Councilwoman Leanne Mellon for Council Vice President effective January 1st, 2022.
Their second.
Mr. President, with lack of a second, I move that we appoint Steve Tulowitzki as vice president this next year.
Their second.
I'll second.
Roll call.
So
Just a second, I'm catching up.
I just want to be clear that the motion now that has the second that you're voting on is an up or down on Mr. Tulowitzki.
Yes.
As vice president, not an up or down as him as a person, as just as vice president.
All right, Counselor Schoen,
Yes.
Counselor Mellon,
No.
Counselor Gardner,
No.
Counselor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
Counselor, or President Kulturitis.
No. All right. So we need vice president, so the motion, so I guess I'm gonna have to,
Well, you still have that. you
I
have
can,
that
I can make another motion, right?
Yes, and you still have Chuck's motion, it's just that
there was in a second.
Councilman Schoen jumped in with another motion. I mean,
There still isn't a second.
There still isn't
can
a
be
second.
There can be another, there
there
can be a
could be a
second to my
second
motion.
to that motion, I guess is what I'm saying.
Better question is, can I second it?
You cannot.
I'll second the motion.
All right. Thank you.
Well, you could have if you had given the gavel to your vice president.
I would be more than happy to do it.
But
I wanted to do something earlier, but that's okay. All right.
Mr. President?
Yes, sir.
It's just a little, it's fine. But it's a little disappointing, I think, that no one on a partisan basis is able to sit second chair for this council and for this town. I understand how things are going. I just think that's a little disappointing for the residents.
Building up here.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
As somebody who's been active with the town on boards and commissions for a number of years, we have had, this is not the first town council that has had both Democrats and Republicans on it. We have been acting over the last 2 years with basically no reference to party affiliation. that we've been looking for what's best for the town of Munster. In the past, when we have had mixed boards, the council always assured that each person was the president of the board for 1 year, until we went to 5 members of the council. And then each member of the board, except one, had the presidency for 1 year, and then the other person, in many cases, served as vice president frequently. We have never had a council where a member was refused in office because of his party affiliation. And I think for the first time since I've been a member of this council, I'm seeing that tonight. It bothers me, it disappoints me.
Duly noted. Roll call.
Counselor Schoen,
Would you repeat the motion?
the motion is that Counselor Gardner nominated Counselor Mellon for the council president for the year ending 12/31.
Vice
2020.
Vice President.
Vice President.
Yes.
Okay. Counselor Schoen, how do you vote?
I vote no, but I recognize that Leanne did a wonderful job before and would make a great vice president. I just think she's the wrong person.
Counselor Mellon,
Yes.
Counselor Gardner,
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki,
No.
Council President Kulturitis.
Yes.
That's a 3-2.
All right, that brings us to the Redevelopment Commission appointments.
Now, this is a little different. The council president appoints 3 to the redevelopment commission. Historically, the council president appoints 3 from the town council. Then as a whole body, the town council nominates and votes for 2 commissioners. And generally it's been, I'm just following the rules. Generally, it is from the town members of the town council.
And just statutorily,
Exactly, it's,
the
Yes.
executive gets 3 appointments and the legislative body gets 2. So you, because you're the president, Dr. Kulturitis, you get 3 appointments that you can just announce. Then there would be like a motion and a second for the 2 other appointments. As long as I've been sitting here and as long as I've known, the Munster Town Council has always appointed itself as the redevelopment commission.
Does it make any difference that these are officers whose terms expire in December and it's for a term that begins in January?
No, because those 2, the motion will be to appoint in January.
Continuity.
Yes.
Okay, so I can appoint myself.
Yes. Is that what you're doing?
I'm doing that. Appoint Chuck Gardner and Leanne for my 3.
Okay, and then you would need the legislative body.
Then I will make a motion to appoint Steve Tulowitzki and Ken Schoen as the remaining 2 members on the redevelopment commission.
Or second?
Second. I'll second that.
Roll call.
Counselor Schoen,
Yes.
Counselor Mellon,
Yes.
Counselor Gardner,
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki,
Yes.
and President Kulturitis.
Yes.
We have a 5-0 on that.
And then the only other one right now that we need to move forward with is the RDA Development District Steering Committee.
I make a motion that we appoint Leanne Mellon as the RDA Transit Development Steering Committee member representative from the town council, effective January 1st, 2022.
I'll second that.
Anybody else? Roll call.
Counselor Schoen,
Yes.
Counselor Mellon,
Yes.
Counselor Gardner,
Yes.
Counselor Tulowitzki.
Yes.
And Council President Kulturitis.
Yes.
5-0.
We will be discussing the remaining of them in 2022. Reports, there are none. Portfolio reports, does anybody wish to speak on any? No?
I've got nothing. I think Professor Schoen is going to take over.
All right. That's just cool.
I just want to mention that as my being a representative to the Lake County Solid Waste district. We have now designated Munster Town Hall as a battery collection site. The traditional battery collection buckets and others that have been chosen by the clerk treasurer will appear in the front foyer, and she will notify the town by way of news you can use to let people know where they can bring things. And I look forward to having a place finally clearing up a kitchen drawer where we can put things. We've always, for anybody who doesn't know, we've for years had battery collection here, but during COVID, when the building was locked, it couldn't be a site because it wasn't accessible to the public. And now it is accessible to the public again, and it's time that we reestablish ourselves as a collector. Thank you. Anybody else?
I would say just on behalf of the Munster Civic Foundation again, like tonight was a great collaboration with a number of entities in town, including the Munster Chamber of Commerce. So if you're looking for your next event that you'd like to have fun with and get neighbors together, Saturday, January 29th, 2022 is the Studio 54 experience hosted by the Chamber and a number of other businesses in town.
I understand that at that dinner, we're going to be recognizing the Citizen of the Year. You don't happen to know who that is?
I see in the lower left, there's a picture of Clerk Treasurer Wendy Miss, who is a long-serving former president. And so it will definitely be a very cool event. I have asked Clerk Treasurer if she would sign this poster for me.
Ooh, yeah, then you can auction it off later.
So that was my
Thank
announcement.
you very much.
And just in general, in the Civic Foundation, I think we had a very successful year of activating this organization. Councilor Mellon, what you're doing with Tiptoe Through Town, tulips are still for sale. It's going to make a big change in the town next year. So just commending not only the Civic Foundation, but all of the organizations, the police department, park department, public works, who've collaborated, looking forward to a great 2022.
And all of our volunteers, we had a lot of participation throughout the town.
It's been wonderful. It's been refreshing.
I really, I hate bringing this up at this time of the meeting because this wasn't really thought out very well beforehand. But with the chamber dinner, and I know in some situations and many years ago, the town did purchase a table, again, to support the Chamber of Commerce and everything else. I'm wondering if that's something that can be done, or at least that we should look into. Having a table of town council employees or whatever, a table sponsored by the town for that event. And again, I don't like bringing things up at the end of a meeting like this, but maybe we should look at doing that. We're all trying to wake up.
All right, announcements, all town council meetings will begin at 7 p.m. unless otherwise noted. December 27th, no meeting. January 3rd, regular town council and redevelopment commission meeting. January 10th, no meeting. January 17th, regular town council redevelopment commission meeting. That brings us to adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you for attending. All righty. Let's move. It gives me a green light.
I'm ready.
Do you have to open up another Zoom or is that the same Zoom?
Nope, it's the same Zoom. Gentlemen.
All right, I will bring the redevelopment commission regular meeting for December 20th, 2021 to order. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Schoon,
Present.
Commissioner Mellon,
Present.
Commissioner Gardner,
Present.
Commissioner Kulturitis,
Present.
Commissioner Tulowitzki. I already out of rhythm for next year. And then our school board representative is at an executive meeting this evening. That would be Mr. Castro. So he is excused tonight.
All right, it brings us to open to the public. Does anybody wish to speak at this meeting? Is there anybody online? I will close open to the public. That brings us to the consent agenda.
I make a motion that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Roll call.
Commissioner Schoon,
Yes.
Commissioner Mellon,
Yes.
Commissioner Gardner,
Yes.
Commissioner Tulowitzki,
Yes.
and Commissioner Kulturitis.
Yes.
5-0.
There's nothing under old business. Under new business, we have the Redevelopment Commission Annual Meeting.
Very exciting stuff here. Again, this is the use of Indiana code. Can I please say Indiana code 36-7-25-8? And each redevelopment commission should annually present information for the governing bodies for all taxing units that have territory within an allocation area of the redevelopment commission. You will find attached the three required pieces of information: the commission's budget, the long-term plans for the allocation area, and the impact on each of the taxing units. The Lake County Council, the School Town of Munster, the North Township Board, the Lake County Public Library, the Hammond Sanitary District we're all invited to tonight's meeting. And in tomorrow's mail, they will each receive copies of these financial informations, thus completing the requirement that we had. So this is, I don't think there's any action to be taken, just formally presenting the information.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
There's nothing under reports, nothing under announcements. That brings us to adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
There's a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you for attending.
Is there a separate Zoom meeting for so we're just keeping this one rolling? Okay.
Sure.
Dr. Andy, can you sign, please? Counselor Schoen, if you would like to,
All right, thank you, council. Really appreciate you and the generosity of your time meeting after the regular meeting. Today, I am happy to bring to you the Town of Munster, Indiana Water, Sewer, and Stormwater Rate Study that will be presented by Chris Eckert. I'd like to thank staff for their diligent work leading up to this presentation. The Clerk Treasurer's Office, Public Works, our on-call engineer, Jill DiDamaso, worked very, very hard, and we all worked very closely together. It was a great collaborative opportunity for us. We rose to the challenge, and I'm proud of what we've done so far. So without further ado, Mr. Eckert.
All right, good evening, Mr. President, Town Council. Chris Eckert with New Gen Strategies and Solutions. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. Can everybody hear me? Okay, fantastic. So tonight, I'm going to be making a presentation, trying to stay as high level as we can, but I will admit there are a lot of numbers tonight. I will not read every number off the screen. We're not going to go through every single number in this presentation, but I do want to make sure you understand the work that has been done, the recommendations that are coming out of this tonight. So with that said, we'll just jump right into it if we can. Before we get into any numbers, I want to remind you that when we are looking at the water, sewer, and stormwater utility, we are looking at a business. This type of a utility is tracking what is called an enterprise fund or a proprietary fund within governmental accounting. Those are reserved for business type activities of government. So while you sit here tonight as a council, I also need you to understand you sit as the board of directors of a business. And so what we're looking at tonight is the condition of your business. When you think about a business must do several things. Number one, you must make sure that revenues match or exceed expenses. If you don't, the business is insolvent. The second thing you have to do is make sure you are reinvesting in your business. You must always reinvest back into the business to keep it going. The third thing you need to do is make sure that you are saving for a rainy day. And for water utilities, that is the absolute truth. When it rains, people tend to irrigate less, so we sell less water. So we literally are saving for a rainy day. We need to make sure that we have sufficient money in the bank in order to maintain our cash flows. So all of those things, if you can keep those in mind tonight as we talk about the condition of your enterprise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the water utility first, then we're going to switch gears and go over to the sewer stormwater utility. So with that, specific to the water utility, some issues that you're facing in your water utility right now. As we look at your current water rates, your current water rate performance, looking under normal weather conditions, we've gone back, we've looked at historical water use, correlated that with weather. So we're trying to get a quote normal period of normal use. Now we all recognize we've just been through a pandemic. A pandemic is not normal. We have tried our best to normalize for that. So again, we are looking at normal usage pre-pandemic. But as we look at those water rates, right now they are insufficient at current levels to fund current operations. But we're going to make a distinction tonight between current operations and what we need to be doing. When you look at your water utility, you are providing a service level to customers. As I understand it, in talking with your staff, right now, our current level buys us approximately 30 main breaks a year. That is the service level that we're providing to our customers. So we're making a distinction tonight between what we're currently doing, our current operations, and what we should be doing as a business, reinvesting in that business. We're going to have two scenarios tonight. Scenario one, anytime you see scenario one, is current operations, just doing what we've been doing. Scenario two is coming in and taking the next step, coming in and increasing some O&M expenses, some operations and maintenance costs, coming in and making some capital investment, also saving for a rainy day. So that's scenario two when we get there. But again, water rates right now, in our opinion, are insufficient at current levels to fund current operations, but current operations are insufficient to maintain your business in the long run. The other thing I want to bring to your attention tonight, it's our understanding that this is the first time you've ever been through what we refer to as a cost of service study. So a cost of service study has basically three components to it. The first thing we do is we look at what are called revenue requirements. What is the revenue that is required to be generated through rates? Once we determine the revenue requirement, we then come in and we allocate that revenue between customer classes. You're going to see three groups of customers identified on the water side tonight: residential, non-residential, and sprinkler or irrigation. And so what we've done is, based on the American Water Works Association's industry standard methodologies that they promulgate through the M1 manual, we have gone in and we've allocated those revenue requirements to those classes to see who should be generating revenue versus how they're generating revenue at the moment. So that's the second step in the cost of service process. The third step is rate design, where we come in, and that's really the art side to this. How are we going to price service to these customer classes? But again, it's our understanding this is the first time the town has been through this formalized process before. So with that, again, we've talked about this scenario one, that's current cost. Scenario two, that is your current cost, but we've also worked with town staff, worked with your engineer to identify what are those other operations and maintenance expenses that we need to be incurring to increase the service level of our business. We've looked at a capital, a capital cost, a capital plan. We're going to be looking at that here shortly. The third thing we've added in scenario two is depreciation. Now, probably have some accountants in the room. When we talk about depreciation, depreciation is a non-cash item. It is an accounting term that is used to put a number to the use of an asset, the loss of value for an asset by using that asset. So why did we include depreciation expense in here as a non-cash item? Another way to look at depreciation is, as we use an asset, as we lose that value, we eventually have to come in and replace that asset. So the idea of putting depreciation into the revenue requirement is to begin setting funds aside so that we have money for future replacement. Now, again, depreciation is based on original cost, not replacement cost. It's going to cost us more to replace our infrastructure in the long term, but this is one mechanism to come in and start setting aside money so that you can replace your infrastructure in the future when you need to. Yes, sir.
Mr. Eckert, is there any rule of thumb for how much higher replacement cost is versus the original cost that we're seeing in depreciation?
Construction cost historically, just looking 20 years, it's about 3% more every year. So construction cost goes up I think it was running about 3.31% until this year. Material and supply costs right now are just through the roof. So again, 3% annually. So what we would do, to get to reconstruction costs, we would go back and look at the original date of install, what was that cost, and we escalate it with compounding over time. But really that 3% value is what we'd be looking at.
Okay, and that's represented in here, the replacement cost.
So again, we're looking at depreciation costs. We're looking at original costs. We're not looking at replacement or reproduction costs. So the idea here is we just want to start setting aside funds. When you begin to see the customer impact, you're going to see why we've just started with original cost. We've got a bit of a hill to climb before we get to replacement cost. Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions? So as we look at scenario 1 and scenario 2, we tried to put this together both in graphical and numerical forms. So the bars, the vertical bars that you see, the green and blue bars, those are the baseline expenses, the revenue requirement, if you will. That's what we need to be generating. Green is scenario 1. What are we doing right now? Blue ideally is where we need to get. The dashed line across the horizontal line, that's revenues. That's where our revenues are performing right now. If you look down at the bottom of the table down below, you can see the variance there. So the scenario 1 variance, we need to be generating $1.11 million more a year there in 2022 just to get to our current cost. The variance down below, the 2.91, that's what we would need to get all the way up the hill to cover everything that we need to be doing. So that's really what we're looking at. That's also why we stuck with original cost to start with. So what do we mean by baseline or scenario 1 expenses? You can see that's primarily operations and maintenance expense. That is the cost the town has to operate and buy water from the district. You then have the new expenses down below. At the back of this presentation, there's a whole host of slides that outline what the new O&M is, what the capital is, how we got to those numbers. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but again, there's supplementary information in the back of the presentation that will line item out for you what those expenses are. So again, you see the scenario 1, the new expenses, and then we add those together to get to scenario 2. Capital. So capital is an important part of utilities. We have pipes, we have plants, we have pumps. All of these things need to be replaced. They are very expensive. When you look at your business, a water utility, a sewer utility, they are capital intensive businesses. These are not cheap items. You cannot generally just run down to Lowe's and buy some of these items. Some of the smaller things you can, but these are expensive. They're expensive items. So because of the expense that we're looking at, we also like to use debt where we can. Now, I recognize debt is a 4-letter word to many people, but why is debt important for a utility? When you think about debt, debt allows us to amortize the cost of an asset over the life of the asset. So typically when we issue debt, long-term debt, that's 20 years. We're amortizing the cost of an asset over the useful life of the asset. By doing that, those that are using the asset are paying for it. If we came in and just used cash today and funded a $1 million pump, then everybody today is paying for it, but the people that are benefiting from it in the future are not paying that capital cost. That's why you see some debt-funded principal in here for some of these capital projects. Some of our smaller items, we do cash fund, but we are anticipating the need for debt to truly fund the capital items for our utility. Again, this is our projection right now. You can see we were using 2.75% interest. Who knows what the interest rate market is going to look like in January, honestly. This is just our best estimate right now. So again, that's the capital items that you see in scenario 2. The other thing I want to visit with you about on the water side tonight is the effective cost of water. And on this chart, I want to focus on the top portion. So you buy water, you buy wholesale water, you buy treated water, you then as the town pick it up and transmit it onto your residents. So at the top, we have projected water purchases there, 1.2, that's 1.2 billion gallons. We're in thousands gallons, kgals, in that unit of measure there. And if you buy it at $1.05, that's 1.28, almost $1.29 million a year. However, that water that you are buying, all of that water, you are not delivering to your customers because you are losing water. You'll see the footnote at the bottom, we've assumed a water loss of about 16%. Now, water is going to get out of the system. A water system is pressurized. Water follows the path of least resistance. It's going to get out. So we are going to lose some water. Ideally, we want to keep that ratio at 15% or less. But what is the impact of water loss? We're buying at $1.05, but by the time we turn around and sell it to our customers, you can see we have to price it at an effective rate. We have to price it at $1.44 to recover that cost. What we have done is we have bought a product that is not revenue producing because we cannot get that to our customers. Why is this important? This is why we reinvest in our system. We reinvest in our system, we make capital investment in our system to tighten up our system, reduce the amount of water loss. That way we don't have non-revenue water or non-revenue producing water. So as you think about this concept of capital investment, in some ways it can pay for itself because now you're not buying a product that you're not delivering to your customers. That's why it's important we look at the effective cost of water. The other thing this tells us is the lowest we could price water just to recover our wholesale cost is $1.44. Obviously, that's projected to grow over time. Any questions about that?
It's projected to grow over time because the system is getting older and you're going to lose more water as the system gets older.
Both, and the price is going up from your wholesale provider. Yes.
And so is that 16% water loss you assumed, is that the difference we're seeing between $1.05 and $1.44?
That's correct. You're having to price water at it. You're buying it at $1.05, but you're having to price it to your customers at $1.44. That is the cost. So it's about 39 cents is the cost of water loss.
And over time, as we make these investments, that gap will close.
Ideally, that's the goal. The more investment, there is a break-even point because you can only get a system so tight.
Yeah.
But ideally, if we're making that capital investment, we shrink that gap over time.
Thank you.
So water customer cost allocation. This is where we get into the cost of service side. So what does the cost of service analysis do? We are coming in and we are pricing or allocating service to our customers based on how they are using our system. We want efficient customers. As a utility, we don't want to install capacity that sits idle in our system. So we want efficient customers. We want customers that are using the system consistently all the time. So in this cost of service process, we come in, we allocate the cost to customers, and then compare back to where they are generating revenue. So the green dots that you see on the screen, that is where each class is generating revenue. So for example, your residential class generating there about $2.5 million a year. The top of the blue bar, that is their allocated cost. So in this case, our residential customers, they're generating $2.52 million a year, but they need to be generating $2.9 million a year. So as we look at just a percentage, what would we have to do? We would have to go up on rate revenues 15.87% in order to recover what their allocated cost of service is. However, as you begin to look across the bottom between residential, business, and sprinkler, the other element that cost of service allows us to do is to begin to identify subsidies. Where might one class be subsidizing another? So where that number gets larger, there's possibly some subsidization by another class. In this case, sprinkler, your irrigation customers. Your irrigation customers are the least efficient customers on your system, because their average day demand rocks along during the summer, but then winter they shut their system off. So they're not using capacity. They're not an efficient user. That tends to push more cost to them, but that's why we also tend to see pricing higher for sprinkler or irrigation customers. Cost of service is one data point in this process. Ideally, we want the utility to stand on its own. We want the customer classes to stand on their own. There may be other reasons to deviate from cost of service, but this is the guidepost that we set to determine where we should go from here.
Mr. Eckert, can you give an example of an irrigation customer?
Irrigation customer would be somebody that is watering their yard. They've got the sprinkler system in their yard.
On a separate meter?
It would be on a separate meter. Businesses that have a separate meter for an irrigation system.
And do we have currently lower rates or higher? How are the rates for those 2 meters?
I believe, and this is subject to check, I believe they're exactly the same right now. There is no pricing differential. So, but again, that's subject to check. I don't have those on me right now. So, scenario 2, cost of service. Again, all customers are recovering under scenario 2, which we knew that. So what does water rate design look like? If we were coming in just to do scenario 1, just to get where we need to be right now, this is what the residential rates would need to look like. All we've done is increase these rates across the board. We did not change rate design. Right now you have a 2-part rate design. You have a minimum monthly fee regardless of use. There's a volumetric charge based on use, and this is what we refer to as a declining block rate. So the more you use, the unit rate goes down as you use more water. That is one way to price service. Other communities use a flat rate where they charge the same regardless of use. Other communities use what is called an inclining block rate, where you flip this and the unit rate actually gets more as you use more water. So there are different ways to design water rates. So again, that's the rate under scenario 1. Scenario 2, again, same rate design, but the rates are obviously higher. But what does this mean? Obviously, you see a lot of numbers on the screen. Let's look at what this does to an average residential customer. 5,000 gallons of use, annual average water use. The green line at the bottom, that's the current bill, $29.48. That gets you 5,000 gallons of water every month right now. Under scenario 1, under the rates that we showed you, that would be an increase up to $34.25, going from $29.48 a month to $34.25. Scenario 2 is the hill. That's where we add in the capital. We add in the O&M, the additional O&M, where we add in the depreciation as we plan for replacement, going up to $45.75. So again, slightly less than $5 a month there under scenario 1. We're getting $16 there plus on scenario 2. So that's a sizable gap as we look at that. However,
and this assumes residential customers.
this is just residential customers, that's correct. But every council I'm in front of wants to know, how do we compare to everybody else? How is everybody else pricing service? Because every community I go into, I hear, oh, we're the most expensive. We have the most expensive water bill. Very rarely is that the case. So I'm providing you some comparisons tonight, but before I jump into these, I do want to say that this is not apples to apples. Every community is different. Every community may have different water sources, different ways to treat water, different ways to treat wastewater, different ways to fund their utility. So this is not apples to apples as we look at this. But what we've done is we've taken data from the IURC's website, and we've looked at investor-owned utilities, other nonprofit entities, and then municipal utilities here in the state. And in the chart you see right now, this is the investor-owned utility. Very colorful, but it's hard to see the text. The orange bars, those are the Aqua Indiana systems. That's what they would pay for 5,000 gallons of use. The green bars, that's Indiana American. And then the dark blue bars, those are other independent providers within the state. The light blue bar, you can see you're down near the bottom at 29.48, scenario 2. Then the light blue bar above that, that's 34.25. That's scenario 1. Scenario 2, 45.75. That's the light blue bar at the top. That's where you would be under scenario 2. So again, just comparing these different options with what investor-owned utilities are charging in the state right now. Investor-owned utilities are businesses. They earn a rate of return. They do not have any type of taxing authority. So they are truly running this like a business. This is how other businesses in the state are pricing service. The next chart is not-for-profit entities. These are not municipal systems, but they are other nonprofit entities. Again, those are the dark blue bars. The light blue bars are where you would be. Right now, you're towards the bottom at the 2948 and the 4575 for scenario 2, up there towards getting up there towards the top.
Is it safe to assume that since local communities are not in here, that we're higher originally?
So
right now than high?
The reason the local communities are not in here is because this is data from the IURC's website. They are not regulated by the IURC as far as rates. But let me give you some data points here for just a second. The chart you see here right now, this is the municipal comparison. And again, these are other municipals whose rates are regulated by the IURC. But I did write some data points down earlier. Let me get to those if I can. So other communities that I wrote down that would be more comparative. So I started with Whiting, 1780. So they would be down towards the bottom of this comparison. The next one on the list that I had was Griffith, 2390. So again, another comparative community. Highland, 4269. That is putting them very close to the top. Then I had Hammond at 4930 for 5,000 gallons of service. So those are just some comparison points that I pulled of other communities. Again, the data that you see on the screen here is just from the IURC's website. But another way to look at this, we put together this other graphic, kind of combining everything. At the top, you see the IOU range. So this is the investor-owned utilities. The middle bar is the not-for-profit entities. The bottom are the municipal providers. The vertical bars that you see current, you're at the 2948, you see scenario 1, scenario 2. This is a better way graphically to kind of come in and really put this together. Where would you fall within this comparison group? Again, this is not apples to apples. We have to do what is right for our community. We have to do what is right for our business. So this is just informational. Ultimately, we have to do what we have to do to maintain our business. With that, any questions on the water side?
Are these, on this chart, are these like normal distributions? I know you showed the range, you know, you can have one that charges $6 for 500,000 and it kind of gives a different.
So this is not a normal, this is exact data points. These are
No, I
real
know, but
values.
For nonprofit organizations from 6 to 73, it's a pretty broad range.
It's a broad range.
Are most around 6 or most around 7, or does it look like a regular?
It's honestly going to depend. You'd have to go back to those actual data values to see it. So if we just back up right quick, so the not-for-profits, they're probably centering around that $30, $40 range. Probably actually going more towards that top, because you can see you've got 47, 45, 43. So they may actually be curving a little higher for the not-for-profits. On the investor-owned, they're really the bulk of them are between 40 and 45 is kind of where they're centering. And then the municipals, unfortunately, the municipals are lower. The municipals are really running probably, I mean, the bulk of them 26 to maybe 30, getting up to 32, 33. But again, the difference there in IOU, running it like a business and generating a rate of return.
And why do you think that is, that they're so different? I mean, it's water, like we're all drinking same water. Why such a difference between an IOU, a not-for-profit, and a municipal?
Part of it is the rate of return, because not-for-profit municipals, you're not trying to generate a return. You're not trying to generate a profit. You're just breaking even. The other element of that, in my opinion, in my experience, my municipal clients are very concerned about affordability of service to their customers, and they tend to, this is probably not the politically correct way to say it, but they tend to kick the can down the road. They tend to defer maintenance. They tend to defer capital. They don't want to raise rates because it is a politically difficult exercise to go through. So most of my municipal clients, they are behind the 8 ball until you get to a point where you simply can't. You get to a point where regulations, the Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, you can't wait any longer. If you wait any longer, you're now subject to fines from the regulators and you still have to make the improvements. That's the state of most municipal utilities, honestly, throughout the United States.
And have you included, or do you have any stories of what happens to community when that happens?
There's two options. Again, you either get fined by the regulators and you have to do the improvements, or I actually have some clients that have gone under development moratoriums. They cannot build, they cannot do anything in their community until they make the improvements. So that is also, we've seen that. The worst thing, in my opinion, is you can have the EPA come and knock on your door. We don't want the EPA here. Great organization, but they can stay where they're at. We can take care of business.
And are there examples in Indiana or the neighboring communities of that having happened?
I mean, there are some consent decrees in terms of wastewater around. I don't know anything on water, but I mean, I do have some clients. I've got a client we're working with right now. They went under a consent decree 3-4 years ago on wastewater, and they're having to make substantial improvements in their system, millions of dollars. I think last time I looked at the number, they're like $60 million in terms of consent decree improvements that have to be made. And that's not here in this state, that's back in Texas. But we see that all over the nation.
And the only place that money comes from is from residents or water users, let's say.
There's very little free money out there. There are some limited grants, but there's not a lot of free money. The best we can do is access low interest loans through the federal government WIFIA program, through state revolving funds, but there's very little free money, unfortunately. And that money has to be paid back. That has to come from ratepayers.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the water side? All right, moving on to stormwater and sewer. So the town has a sewer collection system. You fund this through fees from the Hammond Sanitary District. So you get revenues from the Hammond Sanitary District that come back to you to help fund your sewer collection system, but you also subsidize that sewer collection system with stormwater fees. When we look, so when I say sewer, we are really looking at stormwater. That is a stormwater charge that's paying for sewer and stormwater. So your current stormwater fees, they are sufficient to fund the sanitary sewer collection system, but there's a gap there. We also have stormwater activities that we need to fund that we are not adequately funding right now through the stormwater fee, because all those stormwater fees are going to support the sewer collection system. Very similar setup in this side of the presentation. Scenario 1, what are we doing right now? Scenario 2, adding those other elements that we've already talked about. So again, the green bar, scenario 1, blue bar, scenario 2, the dotted horizontal line, the revenues we're generating right now. If we changed nothing, our current stormwater fee would be fine right now to fund sewer activities. It's that gap is really where we're at, that blue bar gap. That's all the stormwater activity that we need to be funding. If we don't do that, what do we get? We get flooding, we get drainage problems. So that's why it's important to adequately fund this so that we can handle the runoff here in town. Again, the baseline expenses set up a little bit differently. You see at the top, the sewer, the middle is the stormwater, then combined at the bottom. So we're taking sewer, stormwater, doing it, putting together the combined values, because ultimately that would drive the fee. Yes, sir.
On the freshwater side, it was easy to imagine what the capital cost would be of replacing water mains and pipes and that sort of thing. The gap shown on the previous slide to the blue bar, what sort of things are being paid for?
So in general, you're dealing with curb and gutter, you're dealing with storm sewer. Do you have any specific examples you want to cite on the stormwater side?
Sure. Routine catch basin cleaning. Right now, we clean when someone complains. We would go out on a routine basis and clean catch basins, jet lines. I would love to see some incremental separation of the sanitary collection and stormwater. You might recall when we did an audit of Schoon Ditch, We found an illicit discharge that we had to fix. We would like to do more investigations like that. And when you do more investigations, you find more things that you are legally required to fix. So we are taking care of our residents' health and the health of the environment. So those are just like some right off the top of the head things that we could be doing more robustly.
And these aren't big infrastructure. We don't need new sewer lines to be built or.
Well, there's sewer line, Jill, Dave, Chris, Steve. I don't want to steal your thunder here.
We do sewer line, older lines, and it's a fiberglass they inserted in there. I don't know if anybody's lived near where they did this, but you get an odor and smell through it. But that is an economical way, because you're not disrupting above ground, you're just relining what you have, which is a good way to do it.
So the collectors and laterals do, just like water mains, deteriorate over time, and those need to be replaced. Those are our responsibilities. The HSD, the Hammond Sanitary District, of which we are a minority member, is responsible for force mains, interceptors, pump stations, detention, and the treatment facility. But everything that gets to a force main, and an interceptor and a pump station, we maintain.
And that's what we're talking about investing in with this gap, again, on the previous slide, between.
That's correct. So when we look at stormwater under scenario 2, the new expenses, you see the O&M there. So the middle section, the O&M, there is some capital there, but it really is the O&M that's driving on the stormwater side.
I could actually see on my bill, the rate that you were talking about. I don't see where you're getting these numbers on my bill.
You could tell from the water standpoint.
The water, I can see the water, but I see where are we being charged for the sewer maintenance?
So sewer maintenance is what we receive from the Hammond Sanitary
I
District.
understand, but I'm trying to figure out where this number comes into
Right.
the breakdown here.
Do you see your stormwater?
I see a sewer maintenance, and that's all I see. I have Hammond retro fees, HSD administration fee, HSD residential flow, trash, sewer maintenance, hydrant, tax. The first one is my 1-inch water, which is right that he showed up on the screen, but I do not see how these numbers were calculated, so.
Okay, so we're not to the actual bill yet on the stormwater side, but again, there should be, and I'll have to look at the bill closer, but there should be a stormwater charge every month on the bill.
Stormwater maintenance.
Yes.
of $14.76.
Okay, so if we just jump forward here a little bit,
I'm just trying to make sure I'm.
so 1476.
Okay, all right, you just
So-
said it there.
Yeah, so that's the stormwater fee. Yes, sir.
All right. Just wanna make sure.
No, I appreciate the clarification.
So much less than flat fee for all the charges.
Stormwater maintenance.
Right.
Okay.
So again, we talked through kind of our new expenses on stormwater. Again, there's a lot of data in the back of this presentation that lines out. These are just summaries you're seeing here. But there's a lot of information in the back that lines out what these activities are, what the capital is. So again, total expenses under scenario 2, really looking at the combined component down. We've got sewer, stormwater, the combined. Ultimately, that combined amount is what would be funded or needs to be funded through the stormwater fee. The 1476 that we talked about has got to go up to bridge that gap. So new capital outlays, again, we've briefly addressed this as we look at both cash funded and then again, debt funded capital. There's not as much debt funded capital on the sewer stormwater side. It really is the O&M that you see on the sewer stormwater side that is driving up scenario 2. So cost allocation, how do we allocate cost? What we've done is we've come in and we've allocated the sewer side based on sewer flow, the stormwater side we've based on impervious area. So what we've done is we've looked at who causes runoff to be incurred based on impervious area within the town. We've then allocated that cost out. So scenario one, what's interesting about scenario one here, you see the rate revenues, the blue diamond, the top of the green bar, that's what they need to generate. So your residential stormwater right now is insufficient, but your non-residential is slightly high. So in this case, we would be saying that non-residential under scenario one, your non-residential customers are subsidizing your residential customers. If we were going to come in and correct this, we would raise residential. We would probably leave non-residential alone for right now. But again, that's scenario one.
And this is water?
This is sewer and stormwater.
Sewer.
So this is putting sewer and stormwater together, allocating the sewer cost based on flow, allocating the stormwater cost based on impervious area.
Got it. So this is how we're able to currently cover costs, and in this case, it's the non-residential which is
Exactly.
subsidized.
You're exactly right. But again, that's scenario one. Where we need to be is scenario two. Obviously, on scenario two, everyone is under recovering where we ultimately need to be. So the rate, what does the rate ultimately look like? Scenario one, right now, $14.76 is the monthly residential bill. We would take that to $15.24. You see commercial $7.38. We would actually leave commercial alone, leave non-residential alone because of our cost allocation. But that is scenario one.
Chris, do you want to call out the third line that has zeros?
Yes, your faith-based institutions, they are not charged for service at this time. That is stormwater. They're not paying for stormwater.
Is that a matter of statute?
I don't believe that's a matter of statute. In most places, it's a discretionary exemption. You can choose to exempt them or not. I have a number of clients that exempt churches, schools, nursing homes. Others choose not to. That really comes down to a point of policy for the council.
And do we have an idea of the percent usage?
Unfortunately, I don't, but I can get you that answer.
Where does schools fall into this equation?
I
Or municipal, yeah, schools are.
I believe schools would fall into commercial, but I would need to check that.
Okay.
All right. So again, the 1476 going to the 1524 under scenario one. Scenario two is the hill. 1476 going to 3721. That's a monthly fee for residential. That's what is needed to ultimately get to where we need to be with all of those additional activities. Again, right now, we're maintaining the sewer collection system with the stormwater fee. It's what do we want to actually accomplish on the stormwater side? How much of that gap do we want to close? So again, you see just graphically what that looks like, the current bill scenario one and scenario two. And as far as a regional bill comparison, the IURC does not have data on stormwater fees. So what we did pull Highland, Hammond, and Griffith, who do charge for stormwater. You can see what they're charging right now. It is my experience, stormwater is undercharged throughout the United States, honestly. Very few communities charge what they need to charge to fully fund stormwater. It's an area that residents don't typically understand. They don't understand a stormwater bill until there's a flooding event. I had a community I worked with where they had back-to-back 100-year flood events. And this is a community that's in the desert, and they had back-to-back flood events, and suddenly they're ready to adopt a stormwater utility. You don't understand the value of the stormwater utility until it rains and until your house floods, until you go through an event like that. But that's why we see those bills typically lower.
And I'm sure you've heard this, we've had an event in 2008, a flood, it had to do with the levees, and that's been impacted. If we had been up to speed on investing and operating and maintaining all of these things, this is a very hypothetical question, but what would have been the impact, right? Because I'm trying to think of residents understanding this story. Why do we need to invest in something like that? If we had been making those investments all along, would the impact of that 2008 flood likely have been different, do you think?
So I can't speak to the 2008 flood. I don't know at what level that was. Do you want to take a stab?
It's hard to play, historical fiction, but from speaking with many residents who've gone through it, many people who have worked through it, when a levee breaks, no amount of underground utility is going to accommodate the amount of water coming over the levee.
Right.
What I think would be an interesting what if would be, what if at the Memorial Day storm, or what if one of these, 100-year storms that we seem to have, a couple times a year. That's a reasonable question. Is it, what would Columbia look like in a heavy rain? Would you only be able to go through it with a Subaru or a Jeep, right? Or could you go through it like normal? What would Franklin and Southwood look like, right? What would some of the backyards look like? Those are like the what ifs. When a levee is breached, that's kind of like a force majeure, act of God universe thing. So I don't want to oversell that.
Well, that brings up the question of where you put the water. We know where we don't want the water to be during a storm, but most communities, including Northwest Indiana, haven't really decided where the water should be placed during the storm when there's too much for the stormwater system. And I'm not talking about retention basins in residential neighborhoods, I'm talking about large areas the size of a small golf course. How is that figured into the cost?
I don't believe we have any giant basins in our numbers. We are really looking more at O&M and just keeping things maintained, keeping things going. As Dustin said, there are certain events we simply can't plan for. There honestly becomes a cost benefit analysis on some of those items. How much do you want to invest and insure yourself for the future? There's only so much you can do there. So again, there are not large basins in these numbers in any way.
You talked about cost benefit. Have you contemplated a scenario 1.5 or 1.8 or something, right? To the extent that it's like a insurance, you might go for a slightly higher deductible, meaning an 80-year flood would be okay, but a 100-year flood, we wouldn't be able to handle it. Because some of these numbers are quite large, of course.
Yes.
Just wondering
Absolutely.
what thoughts you've given. You've kind of laid out doing nothing and doing what we really ought to do, and I'm not sure if you're getting there.
So again, these numbers were prepared in conjunction with your town staff, with your engineer. Dustin, do you want to speak to any kind of threshold?
Yeah, I can speak briefly on that, and that's why we're having a work study. We sat down as a team and said, well, what could we be doing? What do we think we should be doing, right, about this utility? And this number reflects the known universe, the known knowns, right? We know we need to do this. There are unknown unknowns, right? Not baked into this. But right now, what the point I think would be my key message to reiterate what Chris has said is we're only reacting on stormwater. We do very little getting in front as a function of resource. The pumps in our detention basins, the bubblers, the fountains, all that stormwater stuff, right? Like, hey, vac the lines on Oakwood because there's a lot of trees. Well, okay, we'll get there maybe next week, maybe as fast as we can, right? Much faster now that we have a vac truck. But it's really catch as catch can, and we have a great staff that do the best they can with what they have. But that's it. If you give us anything, we're thirsty, and we'll say thank you for sure. But for the purpose of
have less water.
Yeah, for the purpose of this conversation, we said what do we know that we need to do, and what do we think it would cost, and that's what this is. By no means are we saying it's this or nothing. That's not that was not the intention of the delivery.
Does Lake County Solid Waste, River Cal Basin Committee, anything that they do fall into any kind of stormwater management that we're talking about here?
No, not really. I mean, they have generously partnered with us on projects, and I would anticipate if we had matching funds, that they would continue to match funds with us. So for example, the bank stabilization on just north of 45th on the west side of the bank, which is just behind Camellia. They've done a lot of stuff over in Hobart and Gary. Heck, they've done a lot of stuff here in Munster on the levee, completing that levee, which is a huge, huge deal. They've done a phenomenal job, but their job is to keep the Little Cow waters and the tributaries moving.
So that's not, well, again, it's a player we want to work with, but again, from this discussion, they really don't play any part in this.
No, I mean,
The ongoing maintenance and stormwater collection and removal and
not really. I think that they would be open to receiving a petition for matching funding, because that's really what we've seen at the Little Cow. They're not going to give you money. You have to bring something to the table to get them to work with you. And they've been great partners in that way, for sure. They're a wonderful organization to work with.
Just trying to do a little math here. I'm looking at this, and then I'm looking at scenario one is an extra $5 a month for water and stormwater. And scenario two is $38 to $40,
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if we find something in the middle,
Ideally, you are the policymakers, and
I'm just making sure I'm seeing scenario one and scenario two.
Yes, sir.
You're going from
yes, sir.
a cup of coffee to, you know, do I put gas in my car, or
Yes, sir.
do I possibly, eat?
Again, this is high and low. Low is just keep doing what we've been doing. High is if we could do everything we wanted to do, which
Now,
we recognize
the
that that
question
may
I
not be
have-
possible.
Yeah, the other question I have is the definition, is it a simple definition of residential and non-residential? It says person that owns a house is residential. What is the definition of, what falls under residential as compared to non-residential?
So non-residential.
Who falls under residential?
So residential is going to be your residential homes. Now, can you speak to how you charge multifamily? Do we consider multifamily non-residential or residential? That gets into a utility billing question.
That has to do with the water line
Yeah.
that goes to where.
I don't know the answer to that
Okay.
question off the top of my head.
Is it residential? Multifamily is still residential, so residential multifamily would be considered residential.
Okay.
Non-residential is going to be your businesses, anything that is not.
Schools.
So schools are probably going to be non-residential, I would imagine. We will check on that and get back to you.
All right, my next question.
please check.
My next question is, do we have a breakdown in regards to the non-residentials, in regards to how much certain people are being charged for what, or just the size of the pipe that's going to them?
Could you rephrase the question?
Is Dairy Queen paying the same amount as Three Floyds?
For stormwater?
Water.
Water. Depends on their meter size and their consumption.
So it's the meter size and the consumption?
Yes.
But for stormwater, it's impervious lot.
It's
size.
impervious size, that's correct.
So okay, so Dairy Queen's paying less than Three Floyds, presumably because Dairy Queen's got a smaller parking lot than Three Floyds.
Right.
If that is correct. if
Yes.
that's
Mhm.
correct.
And that's the way commercial is calculated. Residential is not calculated that. That's just a flat residential rate.
But all residentials have the same size water line, and well, the sewers are all should be.
We're talking stormwater.
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 I'm talking about water.
Okay.
I mean, all residentials more or less have the same size pipe running to them.
Well, some have a larger water, but yeah.
We're comparing water bills now. You're 1-inch water, I'm 5/8 water. So
So you have a larger meter.
it's probably
It's safe to say the newer residents have a little larger, older residents.
All new construction residential should be 1-inch.
For the
Mine
spring,
was
generally
60s.
for the sprinkler systems, they have to have a 1-inch line.
And 5/8 as well.
They 45th Avenue. North side and south side.
I have no other questions right now. Thank you.
So with that, that's, again, we've been through a lot of numbers, but again, reminding you, you are a board of directors. And ultimately, you have to determine the path forward on this. We've provided the low, we've provided the high. I would anticipate somewhere in the middle is the correct answer on this. It is our opinion that some level of rate action is needed in the near term, particularly on the water side. The one caution I would give you is let's not wait if we can avoid it. Let's not push this down the road much further, because again, the more you push it down the road, we've already talked about that. The more you wait, the more you push, the higher and higher it becomes. I'm happy to address any other questions you may have.
I guess there's a couple of questions and they might be interspersed with some comments. How, when we talk about operation and maintenance, are we comfortable with the type of personnel that we have down at the garage now? Do we need more personnel in that to account for future water, whatever? And at the same time, are we, so there's a spot where I'm giving everybody a chance that we need to put more things in there. But then do we have in our budget, when we start talking about salaries and disbursement of salaries, do we sometimes put more salaries into these funds because they're enterprise zones? Some office staff, maybe town hall wise, the computer people, whatever else. Are we sometimes better off not putting as much in, but it's been an enterprise zone, so we've been able to find ways to keep funds going moving forward.
So I'm going to try to answer the question that I think you're asking. And I think there were two questions.
There are.
What are you sticking in there right now, and what do you plan on sticking in there in the future?
Right, and do we need to stick more?
Right.
And do we need to put more stuff in there?
So I can speak broadly about what's getting stuck in from a global, and I'll let Dave and Jill talk about what additional, right? So right now, we don't allocate costs for GIS salaries, license, hardware license, software license, stuff like that. And that is a significant function of the work both in water, sewer collection, and stormwater management. It's not being captured at all by those utility charges.
Okay.
A portion of my salary is a portion of Wendy's salary is a portion of the water billing, right? So because they touch it on a daily basis. The new rate, I'll let Wendy talk about any additional staffing that Wendy needs, and I'll let Dave talk about any additional staffing he thought he needed. So Dave, do you want to go ahead first?
Let me put it this way. As long as there's review from the staff to take care of those issues, I guess I don't want to just blanket say this is how we've been operating it and we're going to keep it the same or whatever else. As long as there's review of that, I think that's important. So, again, this is our chance, and I think that's what I'd be most concerned with, is making sure that if we're going to do this, we do this thing correctly, and it doesn't become a catch-all. I honestly trust people in this room that we're not going to make this thing, hey, let's add more money so we can add more people to drive around trucks around town. I don't think that's anybody's intention here. But again, I would just say that this is our chance to really review our current operations and make sure they're as efficient, or if we need more staff to make them efficient, that we get that in line. But Dave, I don't want to interrupt what you were going to say. So
if I could take the first stab at it, I've got the notes. We've done a lot of research on this, and we have addressed the staffing. We're really looking at the need for four additional entry-level public works employees in just the water sewer division, which is Dave's division, which contains all of these three utilities that are the subject of tonight's review. Now, on top of that, there would be, as I think Dustin was alluding to, from the clerk treasurer standpoint, we've included a utility locate specialist and a water billing specialist. And because of new requirements coming down in the area of the municipal separate sewer system, an MS4 coordinator. So we really have looked at the staffing that, in other words, if we were to fund all of these ambitious projects, which by the way are really detailed, we haven't even begun to look at those. Some of the questions have alluded to it, but you will find it at the very end of NewGen's report. In every utility, we've listed with the help of NewGen under O&M activities, all of our type of projects that really would be the reason why these rates need to increase. And so for each of the three utilities, you'll find these operating and maintenance type of expenses. You'll find the personnel expenses listed, and then the capital outlays or the CIP expenses. So there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure needed, which is the reason these rates would have to go up if we want to do all those things.
My general thoughts, and again, this one, I see the need to increase the rate, so I'm not worried about any of that stuff. I guess partially, there's also breakdowns of volume of water and things like that. I'm not sure if there's an efficiency of reducing that from 5 to 3, if there's ways to get additional monies and, from that standpoint and whatever. So no, I'm not afraid of any of that stuff. I guess part of this thing is also, that we can put some clear projects and clear actions that are going to happen because of this increase. I think allows us really to be able to tell the story a lot better. With that being said, I do think like being said, somewhere in the middle ground makes more sense to me than going all the way to option 2 and going up there. But I would think there's some here, some there, and make it work that way. But the not-for-profit rate, the faith-based community rate for impervious soil, makes sense to me to do that. I guess those are a couple of my thoughts real quick with it all.
If I could add, once the council at whatever point makes the political decision to say, what rate level you feel the community could support, then we could back into the actual projects that would equate to funding wise that we could do, and the schedule of when those projects would be done over, because I think, Chris, you've shown a 5-year plan more or less for these rates as to what they would fund. So we could then back into, okay, here's what the new CIP and operating and maintenance plan would look like, all the specific projects that you've been kind of asking about, and it would paint a complete picture that we would reprioritize, in other words.
Would you be able to, if we said, hey, we want to go to the middle ground here, we're going to go 1.5, would you be able to put together a capital improvement plan that would say, here's the next 5 years, here's our plan?
Oh, absolutely. We'd be able to back into that.
Okay.
I think other projects that we've looked at, like the train station redesign or the streetscape, there's like a max min or a high and a low, or, a few scenarios. And if it doesn't have to be super detailed, but very clear, what's the impact, especially on residents and our businesses in town. If you understand what I mean, like what benefit do they get from the investment that we're making over the coming 20 years, lower floods, or what? Maybe NewGen has some ideas for that as well. And then what is it going to cost them? I think that will make it easier for us to make a good decision and also communicate why it's a good decision. Was that statement clear? What didn't you understand? Or what didn't I say well, I should say?
Okay. So it sounds like, and I'm seeking clarity.
Mhm.
It sounds like the kind of the same question Chuck asked was, what could you do with different amounts of money.
What I heard from Mr. Gunty was, tell us how much money you can give us and we'll tell you what we can do for that. And I'm sort of asking for the smarter people to say, here is a collection of projects that we think maybe are most urgent or that have the biggest positive impact on our community, on our residents and businesses. And so ideally, we'd like to get to scenario 2.
Yeah.
But there's maybe, it feels like there might be 1 or 2 steps in between.
That's a very reasonable approach, and that can easily be done because that's the same process that we got here with, and we'll just refine the level of urgency. So things fall out of focus and some things come into clearer focus. We can share those numbers and we can easily get you revised. What a revised rate would be, assuming, I don't want to say if it's in scope or not, but I'm going to trust our consultant that a couple more bites at the apple would not be a heavy lift given the framework that we've established.
Well, and this is the first time we've done a cost of service study. Chris, how often, when would be smart for us to do the next one? Because I'm imagining we might say, let's take this chunk of things that we're going to do. And then as you implement those projects, this is an estimate right now based on information we have. That information is going to change as we start discovering.
It absolutely will, because each utility proposes doing a master plan, right, and doing deep investigative work, right? So unfortunately, what we've found anytime we look underground for something, we find something we don't want to find.
So just stop.
That's to me.
We should stop testing, then we'll have fewer cases.
May I ask you all a question? Because which rate would you be more comfortable raising higher than the other? And the reason I'm asking that question is because, in my opinion, the sewer and the stormwater we can kind of push that down the road.
It's only 50 cents.
No, it's like $20 a month.
and 45 cents to scenario 2 for stormwater and.
But the water, we have 7 water storage tanks in town, and 4 or 5 years ago, you hired SEH to assess those tanks, and at that time, we recommended that within 1 to 2 years, they start getting painted, and they're not getting any better. And if you drive around town, you can see them. Any untrained person can see that they are not in good shape. That fixing those costs are in the water rate, fixing all of them, painting them all within 5 years, I think, right? We're doing all of them. So
you see it on the screen there right now.
So that is a very visible effect of a water rate increase. Those tanks, everyone's driven by the one in Highland on Indianapolis Boulevard. It looks beautiful. So if we're raising rates and we're all paying that, but at least something that we can see, and it's something that needs to be done. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Let me just ask a stupid question. Is that a beautification thing, or is there value in does the water tanks perform better when they're cleaned and painted?
Those water tanks are a big long-term investment for the town. They're like up your home, like for an individual.
Okay.
And so regular maintenance on them protects them from failing. It's a lot cheaper to repaint them and recondition them on a regular basis than it is to have to tear one down and rebuild it back up. The impact to the water system, right? We can't take a whole tank down for an extended period of time, and we can take it down to paint it, but that takes a couple of months. If we had to rebuild one,
So repainting is also reconditioning and
yeah, because the paint
prevents
is
rust.
right. It's protecting the steel. And so they're very sophisticated systems, and they need to be taken all down. And sometimes you'll be sandblasting and you'll sandblast a hole right through the steel, and then we patch it up and we repaint everything.
And it's inside and out, the painting, as well as any of the type of mechanicals that are in the tank and any other flaws in the structure itself.
You might recall a great What's Up Munster post of a water tank on Calumet Avenue. And what was the part that went bad on that, Dave?
It was a failed altitude valve.
Right.
So it's basically the control
Mhm.
for those levels inside of the tanks.
That was like, oh, that's embarrassing. That's one time, right? Like if bad things, we're kind of used to water main breaks. We've got 60 this year, which is not normal. We're just all acclimated to your water being turned off for 4 to 6 hours on a semi-routine basis. It is not normal to have that much water loss.
And some of the things that are in this rate as well are equipment to minimize those disruptions to service, like the valve insertion machine. Sometimes we get out there and we can't turn this valve off, which is right next to the water main break. We have to go 4 blocks away and do another valve, and then even more people are out of water. So if they have a valve insertion machine, they can pop one in, turn it off, and then
So what you're hearing right now is water is way more important.
And much
That-
in much
in plain
what
person
Councilor
speak.
Taliska was asking for, instead of us just throwing, hey, make it $33.40. I think, again, we've gone to,
That was a made-up number, by the way.
yeah. You know, we've gone to the point where we're gonna have a water study. Let's also use the experts in this room to give us their recommendation. I'm not overly concerned. Well, yeah, I don't want to throw just a rate out there. It's a rate, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we're looking for the long-term maintenance and long-term operation of the town. So I'm sold on the fact that there has to be a rate increase. So I'm good with that.
And a lot of what, and I do want to hear what Mr. Spalding has to say as well. Yeah, why don't you go ahead? What would you like to?
Well, and also we need to start thinking about is changing the water meters. They're getting of the age where they need to be replaced. And it's to our benefit because when they get old, they're kind of get lazy. And so we're losing money off of those also.
And so this is something we've talked about also using some ARPA funds for, not maybe the full estimate that doesn't make sense, but what, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the new one we're looking at also has leak detection in it, which will isolate the area where it's leaking. And hopefully we can narrow it down and to find out that area that it's leaking. So that leak, instead of 16%, it'd be nice to get it closer, a better number for us.
And I think to what Mr. Eckhart said, on the stormwater side, people don't understand this stuff. So it's real hard to get people to want to, well, charge what ought to be charged, but also accept that in an understandable way. So a lot of what I'm hearing is really, I think, good news, because you can start to envision, anyone can start to envision what we're talking about. So I really appreciate the work that's done into it. But that's what I would like to see is, here's some scenarios that make sense. It is good to have the Cadillac version of what we would do and tell the story of what that all could do for the town. And then this is what we collectively think
This is a nice Camry.
This is a nice, reliable Toyota Camry premium edition.
Message received.
Yeah, so that would be great. And there is a lot of expertise in the room. And like the painting the water towers, for example, there are opportunities for people to really have noticeable things. Dustin, I've understood. There's a new seal, right, Wendy? For the town of Munster. You can put that sucker up there. Tulip.
Yeah.
Can we make a tulip shaped water
You
tower?
could paint it to look like
You
a
could
tulip.
paint it.
To look like a tulip.
So if you're noticing like the kind of heaviness of the numbers conversation and the lightness of the ideas that we're having let's have a little bit of fun with this, then people will accept it. I think better. Everyone sort of knows that you have to pay for it. There's all sorts of things I like to do in my house, but I can't afford to do them all immediately.
Right.
Can you point out on the flip chart, I see the residential rates. Where are the non-residential rates with the projections for water?
Okay, so we don't have a non-residential projection on here. We tried to limit the number of slides tonight, so we were really just focused on residential. So this, we can get you this prepared for non-residential once we start doing some of these scenarios. So really all you have here are residential. So,
For water.
but yeah, for water, we can get you the non-residential rates. They're not in this
And
presentation.
that is for what size meter? 5/8 meter?
This is for a 5/8 inch meter. So when you're looking at the rates right there, yeah,
Yeah, I
so
understand
that's,
that,
yeah,
the non-residential isn't in here, so how are we gonna?
right. And so
So
as
what
we,
size, what
as we
size meter do
refine,
you want, Dr.
as we
No,
refine
what I'm saying-
scenarios.
What I'm thinking is, why can't we look at charging businesses more?
Yeah, I think that,
We don't have to.
Well, I don't know what it is because it's not in here.
Well, we're not going to decide that today.
that's the other thing. So
We'll get that.
I think most of the conversation we're having is around the cost side and the projects that we want to do, extra O&M, capital expenditures. There are some things that you raised to what Dr. Andy is saying. Flat rates by consumption. Pepsi is a big user, for example, or major users. They pay much less because of the volume. Is that and you've mentioned that there are flat rates or there are inverted rates, rather, the more you use, the more you pay. So I'd love to see that in the next steps as well. We talked about faith-based, or what are some other nuances that we can use on the revenue side? Because we need to increase revenues. And we need to increase costs so that we can maintain. So we'd like to see like what we can do on both of those sides. It also feels better if we know that the businesses are also chipping in a certain way that makes sense, or the impact of if you're paying more, you want to know what other people are paying. That's just sort of human nature. So I'd love to see that in the recommendations.
I just want to stress that with the water, we will, with the increased rate that we're getting from Hammond, it's going to go up again. And we need to stay current with that, with those price increases. So there's a bit of urgency to keep this process moving and make a decision sooner than later. Because even by the time we pass it, we're gonna be months down the road. Exactly.
That's
And
why I would like all the information that I possibly can, so we can make that decision. Because all I'm seeing right now is the residential numbers. I'm not seeing any non-residential numbers. So.
You're talking about for water or storm?
So
Or-
in the
both.
presentation, we don't have non-residential
Yeah.
comparisons in there because we're trying to limit the number of slides, but we can get all of that information.
Okay.
So,
Because right now, all this looks like to me is what the presentation is, all right, the residentials aren't paying as much as they should, so we're just gonna increase all of theirs, and the businesses are not gonna partake in this at all. It's a couple of those graphs that I saw.
No, I understand. Again, non-residential was left out to try and reduce material. We will
No,
get
that's
all,
fine.
we will
No,
get
I
all that
understand that,
information
but-
to you.
Yeah, because as Wendy said, this is pressing, and we don't wanna wait 3-4 months before we make a decision, because then we're gonna be 3-4 months behind where we need to be.
So to piggyback on that, so is there a chance that these numbers will change, or you've looked at the business numbers?
We've already looked at the business
You just
numbers.
don't have
We
them.
just did not get them in the presentation because we didn't want to be here for another hour tonight. So again, we will get the information to you, I
But the
promise.
information's gonna be in a similar.
Yes, sir, it will be in a
format, so I can
similar
actually
format.
understand. Okay,
Yes, sir.
that's all I need.
Regardless, we're gonna be looking at, we clearly need to raise them. I don't think anybody.
On page 14, I think it does get into the volumetric rates that probably are some of the commercial users.
Yes.
So page 14 does give some scenarios now. That's rate 2 and rate 1, scenario 1. And that does give the different fees for the different size lines and stuff like that. So. Like I said, this is good information, and there needs to be something done with it. So what kind of information do you guys need to give us back? Information that we can approve something.
So what I have here, some takeaways is you want to see faith-based institutions included in your stormwater. We're assuming flat consumption. We're assuming declining volumetric consumption. what would it look like if we had flat consumption rather than a declining volume
And we
consumption?
can certainly look at that, but I want to be sure we understand if we go to flat or an inclining, there are some significant swings and impacts there. So we're gonna have to look at that very closely.
Or less deep, less
of a
steep of a decline.
Yes.
I mean, you've used 5,000 as the residential, benchmark so people can get their minds around it. We probably have small businesses and medium or very large businesses. So as we're making the decision, we'd like to.
We're gonna have to show you some examples of what that does.
Yeah, okay. We wanted to get Dr. Andy and the council as an entity, the non-residential slides that you have the data on. As a staff team, I would suggest that we convene. The holidays make it tough, but to look at both storm and sewer, sharpen our pencils, and have a conversation about what are the highest, most critical priorities. One of the things I hope you heard us say was that the water really is, scenario 2 is what we believe to be the most serious. There's some discretionary things that we can live with on the storm and sewer, but there are some essentials, and we would like the opportunity to sit down as a team, the clerk, treasurer, public works, and myself, engineering, and sharpen that, refine that, share that information, have something out the door. So maybe, I don't know if it's feasible that we look at this on the 3rd, but certainly on the 17th, I think would be more than reasonable.
And with the rates for commercial users, I think it does make sense. The more you use, the less you're going to be charged. I would have you look at those breakdowns and see if there's different breakdowns or fewer breakdowns in that scenario. So there's still an inverse relationship, but at the same time, we're not, because again, I think.
Not be sharp.
Yeah, between Pepsi and 3 Floyds and the hospital and the hospitals, there's some huge users of water.
Schools. Yeah.
Schools and stuff like that. And again, I think those all make this a better town, but at the same time, I think we have to be careful, let's look at those.
As we're presenting scenarios and information, also on the revenue side, like affordability ought to be a lens that we look at it from. Councilor Coultright talked about people not being able to, do certain things if the rates reach a certain level. So some sort of metric around that. I don't know if it's percent of income or expendable income or something. What do you use?
The EPA defines it as when you're looking at water service, 2% of median household income. They say anything above that is unaffordable. For wastewater, they add another 2%. For 2.5% for stormwater, they add 0.5%. So ultimately, what they want to see is a combined monthly utility bill at 5% or less of median household income. The problem with that metric is median household income. You have people that are lower than the median household income, so it's unaffordable to them.
Right.
So there's simply not a good affordability metric. We can measure it in terms of median household income, but that becomes almost a policy decision of the council. It's going to be unaffordable for some people, even now. But we can try and put some numbers around it.
Are there smart policy solutions you've seen to help make it more affordable?
That's a hot topic in the industry right now,
Right.
for sure.
Yeah.
I would say so. There's a lot of conversations being had currently.
And I think there's a lot of conversation, there's very little solution.
But, some sort of practical solution or thoughts around it, or we're moving towards it. ARPA funds, for example, like the water $3 million to replace every water meter, so they're a little bit smarter, so we can detect leaks a little bit better. That might save every resident 1 cent, over 5 years. Or, okay, it might be 50 cents. I don't know what the number is. But for the 25% of people who are at half of the median income, for whom this is going to be a matter maybe of the type of food or vacations that they can take or things like that, this might be a great use of ARPA, a better use of ARPA funds. So some scenarios like that, I think would be helpful to make us make a good decision.
I'm just, but I thought, and maybe I got it wrong, but by improving the meters or putting new meters in, we're going to detect losses, so it's actually gonna make the bills go up. Right?
Well, they will read more
Well, I mean,
accurately.
they'll read it
Yes,
well.
They will read
Yes.
more accurately. But remember, your meter is your cash register.
So it'll be less than
The
60%.
the meters will be more accurate and we can fix leaks and therefore not buy water from Hammond that we're not selling.
There you go.
So,
Okay,
so
there is
there's a
savings.
Yes.
revenue capture there because we're not just putting money in the ground essentially.
That makes sense.
Trickling it down.
I mean, they need to be done either way, but I'm just,
Right.
you know, so.
Dave, you've been sitting there, you have something on your paper, you have vast knowledge. Is there something that you plan to say tonight that?
Not just a generally broad statement. The community that I came to previously, where they were at like 45% water loss, which is crazy amount. So he's basing his numbers off like 15 or 16.
16%.
I think we're really at like 20 to 21. So if we can get that down to 15, we would be in a much better position financially, boost revenues, be able to put more investment back into our
Just
system.
back of the envelope, if we could get that 5 or 6% increase.
What would that
what's the
equate to?
What's the impact on one of these average water bills?
Well, it's 39 cents a 1,000 gallons. That's what we calculated right now. So depending upon what your bill is.
I think it's getting late. I might,
Yeah, I
I might be
understand.
missing the calculation in my head, but I really do appreciate all the work that's gone into this, Dustin, for doing a cost service study. I'm looking forward to the actionable recommendations with an eye towards the stories, like all the vast knowledge in this room. If we can let our residents in on the secret of what's going on, I think that's gonna be the best policy.
Okay.
Good. Leanne?
No, I have nothing here to noodle.
Ken, you good?
No further questions.
Jeff, you good?
I'm good.
All right.
I could ask a bunch more questions, but it's
Great.
not.
Thank you very much.
understand everything.
That's all right. And we're gonna close this work study and everybody have a good evening, okay? Thanks for
Thanks,
guys
everybody.
hanging out and it's good information. Thank you for finally sharing it with us. 6
Cindy,
months
do we
later.
sign anything? Saying we were here.
No, we don't. That's only for an executive session. So for tonight's meeting, I take
Because, you know,